Hi, I'm Rev Greg Lewis. I'm the assistant pastor at St. Gabriel's Church of God in Christ, and I'm founder and president of Souls to the Polls. And with me today, I have a group of fine panelists who are going to be discussing how we can work to mesh this protest and this changing time with getting out to vote in August and November. With me today, I have one of my superheroes, Miss Christine Newman Ortez, who is the director of Voces de la Frontera. Did I get that right? Yeah. And Russell Stamper, Alderman of the 15th District. Dr. Rob Smith, Director of CURTO, the Center for Urban Research, Teaching, and Outreach. And Reggie Jackson, partner of Nurturing Diversity Partners and contributing writer for the Milwaukee Independent. How's everybody doing today?
All right, Reverend. How you doing today?
Oh, wow, I'm great.
Yeah,
So,
doing well.
So we just want to get started and just have a conversation here. All the things that are going on right now, these young people are really out here standing up for us right now. And there's a lot of division just based on whether they should be out there and, talking about how, the looting and the burning, is become the focus instead of the long-term focus of changing how police treat us in our communities and how we can gather power to make sure that we have some kind of relationship with the police or relationship with one another so that we can start to kind of police ourselves and make sure that, people are being treated right in our community instead of being, I just have to put it like this, being murdered and killed and tortured in our own community. And as a Black man, I understand how I feel every time a police gets behind me. I'm like, oh man, I'm finna get stopped. Yeah. And that shouldn't be the way it is here. So I think this is gonna be a huge change. And I just wanna say, I was watching the George Floyd funeral yesterday, and they showed a clip of him and his daughter said to him, "Daddy, you gonna change the world." And he said, "Say it again, baby." And she said it again, "Daddy, you're gonna change the world." And look what's happening. Right. The world is changing. So we just want to have a little discussion, and we're gonna start out, how you want to start out there, Alderman Stamper. Let's talk a little bit. In 1969, writer Raymond R. Patterson wrote the book, 26 Ways of Looking at a Black Man. In one passage he wrote, there was enough grief energy in the blackness of the whitest Negro to incinerate America. My question, how might grief energy be harnessed in leadership and activism? And can it be used to propel an army of voters to the polls? You want to start us out, Alderman?
Sure. And thank you for this invitation, and I appreciate your opening remarks. I appreciate the time that we're in, and thank you to the panelists. It's very distinguished, and I'm happy to be a part of this discussion. So that question is very deep, and I look forward to reading that book. So whether you are the whitest Negro or the blackest Negro, the energy to vote now is more important than ever. What I was excited about and shows you the energy that people have and people understanding the importance of voting is right here in Milwaukee on April 7th. We asked for a postponement of the vote because of the pandemic, because of the health risk. And it was denied. It was denied immediately within a matter of 4 to 6 hours of the governor issuing this postponement. Now, what that did was put everybody in a disarray on what we're going to do to open up enough polling sites. Do we have enough people? Where's the National Guard going to do? So we had to rush to provide enough voting. We did not. We failed the voters in that. It was only 5 voting sites. Not only that, we're in the midst of a pandemic. 5 sites in a whole city of 636,000 people. So those lines in the rain for hours to vote at 5 polling sites show the energy and the importance that people can come behind to vote. They tried to suppress, they tried to disenfranchise, and the people understood that, which gave me confidence and happiness on people understanding the importance of vote. So the question of putting that energy of grief goes behind when people are feeling that their right to vote is being disenfranchised or being suppressed or being infringed upon. That will infuse people to go out and vote. So that's one example, and there's many others, but just trying to tell somebody they can't vote is enough fire to get people to go to vote.
Yeah, and let me follow up on that point as well. The one of the key components to one of the many components to what we saw on April 7th was indeed this unbelievable resilience on the part of folks here in the city to exercise that right, with, quite honestly, the fear and threat of death right there at the doorstep, and that can't ever be understated. It can't be stated often enough. It has to be heralded on and on in the annals of history. That was the lowest moment in American democracy since the 1960s, in my opinion. And I will certainly welcome any corrections to that if there were other examples that were equally or more heinous than what we saw here in our own city. It made not only national news, it made international news. We were, as a city, very clearly in the middle of not only some very important racial and cultural clashes and collisions, but we are also clearly in the middle of some very important political wars, right, around partisanship. And so all of that came to a head there on April 7th, and it did piss people off. And I think that what we are seeing in our streets in Milwaukee in particular is today is an extension of some of that frustration, along with and coupled with the police violence. And of course, we then have some generational issues that make it a little challenging because young people rightfully question whether or not their votes matter. And we know that the votes do matter. And as Rev Lewis, as you've said on a number of occasions and others, if the vote didn't matter, why do folks work so hard to take it away from you? And so I think now is a great moment to not only remind folks of the hostile political climate we're in here in our state, to not only try to merge and try to synergize the efforts around addressing police violence and reminding young people in particular the importance of the political process. And if that means saying to them over and over, you need to vote because that's how you can get some of your demands met, then that's what we have to do. And the last thing I'll say is, we have thousands upon thousands of people coming out to protest. That can easily turn into a voter registration drive. you know.
That's right.
I agree.
I wanted to, this is what has been, bothering me here lately, everybody. We're becoming divided about whether these young people should even be out right now, because of the looting and the burning that occurred during some of the demonstrations and protests. And that seems to be a point of division for our community. And, I just want to get, thoughts about that because, that's a real sticky situation. I had an argument with a preacher last night because he called me saying these kids need to get out to the streets. And maybe I said, if they don't stand up for us, who's going to do that? I mean, that just goes with the territory. I mean, so we have to still develop a way of demonstrating, but we can't stop these young people in their energy because listen, I'm not going to get out there with that. They are out there fighting for us. Christine, could you talk a little bit about that? I just want to hear something about that, from somebody who, I want y'all to know Christine is like my hero here. She is the ultimate organizer. What do you think about that, Christine, this protesting and the way that, is inflamed to a point where it's dividing community?
Well, Reverend Lewis, first of all, thank you for your leadership. It's a real honor because I have tremendous respect for everyone here, and very honored to be part of this conversation. I think that what's happened, what's been unleashed is righteous anger. It wouldn't have happened to this scale if it wasn't the kind of impunity of which Black lives have been taken. And we know that is part of like people of color as well, the kind of violence that's been inflicted. And it's an expression of righteous anger. And so I don't think it's about, but it has to move, it has to shift. And because that anger and those protests will only get us so far. Mm-hmm. And what it has to move for is to be part of building a broader movement. And I put elections within that context. Elections in and of themselves as the only route for change will disappoint us. It has to be part of a larger effort to, on a day-to-day basis, name and challenge and transform institutionalized systems and structures that are holding that inequality in place. And one that I can, like even Milwaukee, for me, that one that stands out most recently has also been the need for a stronger fire and police commission. And right now, like the case of Acevedo, who was killed in Milwaukee, is being taken to the Fire and Police Commission. If that body is not truly independent as an oversight, community oversight body over the police department, which has a long record of abuse, and if people don't participate in the evaluation of Chief Morales's leadership at this time, when we have seen overreach, we have not just, I don't know if overreach is the wrong word, but when we have seen the police department here in Milwaukee also undermine the rights, the constitutional rights of people to protest. Like we have to, as organizations, as leaders, name those opportunities, pull back the curtain, and harness that power to those moments, to those places. And in terms of both nationally and especially locally and here at the state. So my main concern when I see those protests is, as you know, I know like Reverend Lewis, you were struggling, and thank goodness that you're here with us as that force for change. We were just at a press conference yesterday where a young man, Michael Jackson, who was fighting for workplace health and safety conditions at Briggs, died in his 40s, leaving 8 children behind. His fiance, who he'd been with for like 30 years, and because of COVID-19, while he was fighting for these changes, and this is disproportionately, COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting Black and Brown communities because of the nature of the work that we do and the communities and the lack of access to healthcare. So all of those things are coming together. So for me, it's like we have to protest, but I do want us to be careful. I want us to get tested. I don't want to lose anybody. That's like the only concern. Is it there? It's there. It has to be there. It's an expression of, but it has to get channeled. And voting is part of it. Voting is part of it because that's why. That's who's also holding us down.
Yeah, I'm certainly. Yeah, I believe that. See, so Reggie, how do we transition from this energy, this burning desire for change? How do we transition to something that's going to be productive and lasting from here? As a historian, knowing the past and understanding what happened before, how do we make this transition? Because it's important that we do. How do we do that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Reverend Lewis, for allowing me to be part of this. I want to kind of begin by saying, I think, you know, the statements about division in the community, I think that division is not really what people think it is. I don't think there's as much division as people assume there is. I think part of it is a disconnect between the younger generation and the older generation. As I've been paying very close attention to the protests in Milwaukee, I've found, you know, I'm good friends with many of the people that have organized the protests, and the protests have been 99% nonviolent protests. The stuff that we see happening at night with the looting, and it's been very little of that, by the way, especially over the last several days. That has not been people that are part of the protest. Those have been people who just want to take advantage of the situation. And when people tie the protests together with the looting as if they're tied together, they're not. That's completely separate. I think we need to keep in mind that we inform people that those people that are doing those ignorant things are not part of the protest. That's something completely separate. And as long as we allow people to connect those two together, then we'll continue to make these same arguments. In terms of what we can do to move forward, I think that this is a perfect moment as we're out there with people protesting to have conversations with the young folks about, okay, what do you want to see happen next? You're out here, you're using your energy, you're using all of this positive energy you have right now. What are you going to be doing 2 months from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now? How do you think that this empowers you in a way that you weren't empowered before? Because one of the things that we don't do enough, and I can tell you this from my years as a teacher, we don't listen to young people enough. We talk down to them. We assume that they don't know very much because they haven't experienced much, but they've experienced a lot that they can articulate in a way that we can't because we're not of their generation. I think it's incumbent upon us, you know, the older generations, to reach out and listen to them and ask for their voices to be part of what we do moving forward. When we set our goals for voting moving forward, ask them, how can we engage your generation in the importance of voting? Because we could say, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that about voting, but we really need to get them to pass that message to their peers. They're not going to listen to us. They need to hear those messages from people their own age. And if we can find a way to bridge that gap communication-wise and let the young leaders in the community be the voices of the community and speak to the young people, then they'll help us make this progress. We can't do it by saying, well, you know, we are the elders of the community and we know what's best. That does not work with young people nowadays. Believe me, they're a different generation. One of the things I hated most about being a teacher is when I was in school, the teacher told you to do something, you just did it. But now you ask the student to do something, they say, why?
Right.
That's the generation we're living with. We have to give them a voice so they don't have to keep asking why, because the why is the answer they come up with.
Yeah. You know, to that point also, Reggie and Rev, this is like social movements 101, right? Mm-hmm. If young people and older folks are not at odds with each other, there's no growth. And that, I think we have to also recognize what like as Reggie mentioned, the seeming division as also a point of contention that will push us forward. Young people have the right to articulate a vision of the world that they see and a vision of the world that they want to see emerge because it's going to be theirs in the future, right? So that there's a very important component to Reggie's comments in that tension, that conflict is very important for moving forward because we'll get past those. And as Reggie said, we need to listen. And I think one of the things we need to listen to is this fundamental thread that is the younger people, more or less, are demanding that we not put property rights over human rights. And this has been a part of some very important broader conversations around human rights and activism for a long time, but I think we see it more pronounced now because we have a very rich vernacular and language around it. And we've seen the question of property rights get played out in the press very craftily to weaken and undermine the broader questions as to why people are in the streets. You can rebuild a building. You can put another glass back into a space. You can replace the physical property of anybody's home or business. And that's not to diminish that 1% that we know may have caused some craziness. But property can never, ever be elevated over humanity and over human beings. And in our society, well, that's what we've done over and over. That's the That's what has led to the exploitation of Black and brown bodies around labor for centuries, the accumulation of property. And I think what we have here in this moment are young people in particular, but not only, but folks who recognize now more than ever that particular question of property cannot ever be elevated over humanity. And what I think one thing we can do as folks who might be considered older is continue to engage with young people around the right vernacular so that we can then approach the press the right way and we can find some alignment there, because I don't think we're in disagreement with that. But when an older generation or an older person says that very thing, well, why are you out there destroying property? I don't think even that older person means stop standing up for your rights.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so we've got to close that gap, and I don't think we are far away on that gap.
Great. You know, and Russell, I want to, you know, ask you this because, you know, you have a bully pulpit that could possibly bring young and the older generation together, because you're right there in the middle. And you know, I was, you know, we had a demonstration last Sunday, and the preachers called me, and they were on the phone, and I said to them, you know, I'm in touch with some of the organizers of these actions, these demonstrations, these protests, and I think we ought to sit down with them and talk about, you know, how we could possibly work together and support, you know, and you can support what we're doing. And, you know, they just didn't respond positively, Russ. And I'm like, you know, so I said, okay, I'm fine with that. You know, we just have to keep working on that. But how are we going to start to talk to each other, the young and the old? And Russ, I really want you to just, you know, just let it go and give me your real opinion about this, man, because that is going to be a point of contention also, that young and old working together and making sure that, you know, we transition to a point where this is going to be a long-lasting change instead of just, you know, after the fight is over, things go back to normal.
Yes. Well, everybody's hitting it on the head with listening to the young people and embracing the young people's needs and their thoughts. The protest is something that we have to embrace, something that we have to get behind them on, because it's not just about the brother that got killed, George Floyd. It's like his daughter said, it's about a national change. People being frustrated based on a lack of equality and a lack of equitable opportunity. So for young people, what I see is bringing them to the table, letting them help us in the process of legislation and laws, and then them seeing the actual change, them seeing the actual, their participation, their involvement, seeing the effects of that right in front of their face in the community. For me, when I walk the neighborhoods, I bring the young people with me. I started a mentoring program right in the office and let the young people develop a program and teach them about legislation or law. It's simple. You develop an idea, you put it on paper, and you vote for it. And we did that a couple times. They got excited, they embraced it and got encouraged. And it was a cleanup program, and they went straight to the neighborhood and cleaned up. They got a little budget, they hired people, and they worked with their friends in an organized manner and cleaned up the neighborhood. But what that did was show them the power of a law, the power of an ordinance, the power of a program that they have orchestrated and directed and brought right to the community. And on the ongoing effect is, if somebody else comes to the neighborhood where that they cleaned up, that they have been a part of, that they're proud of, they immediately know how to talk to their generation. Say, man, we're cleaning up over here, or this is a new direction over here, man. We don't allow that. Young people, us embracing young people and teaching them what allow them to work with their peers and enable them to change their way and become positive. So it's about being positive, setting examples, and showing them what they can do, and the power of voting, the power of resources, the power of where your tax dollars go. And that's why voting is important. Just, and showing them where their money goes, where the resources go, and how it's divvied up, and how a vote or a resource can help you with opportunity and being and having a better quality of life. So that's what I think.
Yeah, giving them a hope for change. See, because they're not really, seeing what you see, or they're not seeing what the older generation is seeing, that, we have to be patient and we got to reach for long-term gratification, not, along with this short-term gratification, but we have to, extend ourselves to be patient. And that's something that they really don't want to hear. But if you break it down and show them how that can be developed, then that's a whole different ball game. And I really appreciate that. So we got to try to work on that. We have to try to bring, these old heads with these young ones, and we have to sit down and have a meeting. And maybe the next time we have a little podcast, we can invite some of these folks and they can express themselves. Absolutely. And we can show them how to gain power our way, and they can continue to gain power like they're doing right now, because I certainly don't want to stifle them from standing up for us, because I couldn't do that. I couldn't go out there and I couldn't be in that struggle, in that crowd, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm 62 years old. And second of all, I've already gone through COVID. So, I just think that, that's great. I want to talk to Christine just for a moment here and talk about, we're like 40% Black in our city, and I think it's like 16 to 18% Hispanic. How are we going to take advantage of that, Christine? How are we going to take advantage of our power and really build it so that we can have a circumstance where we could, have that power working for us in a way that would be productive for Black and brown people?
Well, I think the kinds of opportunities that even through this podcast, to be able to talk about shared struggles, to be able to engage in very specific campaigns that challenge the kind of like, not just the protests, but also the challenge institutionalized racism or cultural expressions of racism, but to do that jointly is really important, and to have that shared platform and to build political power, because we have it. It's there, but it needs to be organized.
Yes.
Because the topic is, how does this connect to also what's happening at this moment with the elections? I do feel like the urgency of the time does have to do with this November election, and the fact that you have an administration that has very clearly aligned itself with white nationalism, not just racism, white nationalism. And if that were to continue, that we are going to see, it's extremely dangerous, for any kind of social justice effort, any kind of social justice struggle. And we know the powers that be always try to play one group against the other. We know that on how they're buying, like you have this like very wealthy families that buy radio time on Latino radio shows, on Black radio shows, and are trying to foster division. So, that's just like a playbook that they've used. But even now, like the things that have come out of the White House saying that the groups that are fighting fascism are going to be labeled a terrorist group, when they've already taken off white nationalists off a domestic terrorist list. How much more in your face can it get? Or like these efforts to, this initiatives to try to bring in a military presence. This is like real. This is real. And that's part of like, I think the moment that we're in, that we have to communicate. It is not just about voting, but it's also when we don't vote, as we didn't do, and it was Black, Latino, and youth that really stepped out in 2016. We don't forcefully step in to challenge this threat of our time. There are going to be serious consequences around the right to organize, and we're having to defend that in real time now.
No, Reverend.
I'd like to get something real quick.
Reggie, I wanted you to kind of tie So you have the advantage of everybody going before you.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to kind of, put together what we've done here so we can be productive. And Doctor, we can let you, have a word right after Reggie talks about that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think one of the important connections we have to start making with people is an understanding of the role that elections play in who become judges in this country. When we look at the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, the federal judgeships, 1/4 of all federal judges have been appointed by Donald Trump. And that is very disturbing because what people don't understand is that the impact of Donald Trump will last way past his presidency. These judges are appointed for life. And when I think about what changes happen in our society, a lot of those changes happen due to court cases, right? And so to kind of connect the Black and Latino experience together in these efforts, I think we have to go back and understand things that happened in the past. For instance, when you look at the Brown versus Board of Education decision, everybody's heard of that. But most people have never heard of Mendez versus Westminster in California, where the California Supreme Court ruled 8 years before the Brown decision that segregated schools, that segregated these Mexican children from their white peers was unconstitutional.
Wow.
And many of those arguments that they used in that case, they collaborated with the attorneys in the Brown decision. So that synergy between our two communities back then is something that we should all know about and understand that we've been working together collaboratively for decades in this country. And I think most importantly, when we think about kind of what's going on now, is when we talk to people about voting, that we have to make them understand that there will always be challenges, that every time we make a step forward, we're going to make some steps back because people will put additional barriers in front of us. Most Americans have no idea that in the 2012 presidential election, that Black people voted at the highest rate they've ever voted before. In fact, the Black voter turnout in 2012 was higher than the white voter turnout in 2012. That's never happened in American history, right? And so what people do is they look at 2016 and say, oh, the Black voter turnout dropped by 13%. But what they don't tell you is that, oh, we put in all of these voter ID laws. We purged people from the voting rolls in multiple states. We continue to disenfranchise people because of felony convictions. We change polling places at the last moments. There's always going to be these challenges that are put in front of us, and we have to be aware that we can't just assume that November will be what we think it's going to be. Everybody thought, April 7th going into that, we knew we were in a pandemic. We assumed, well, there's no way they're going to make us vote in a pandemic, right? But they did anyway. And then we assumed, well, okay, there'll be enough polling places, but we end up having 5 instead of 180. So I think a lot of what we do is we make assumptions without thinking that, listen, there's somebody on the other side that wants the exact opposite of what we want. And we have to be aware that we have to be up for that challenge. And I think part of making that challenge something that we can be, progressive towards moving forward is to have more communication with the people of color in the city. We have to bring the Latino, Black community, the Asian American, Native American communities together to be in the same room at the same table having these conversations, because we don't collaborate enough. We work in silos, and as long as we work in those silos, I've done work with Christine and her organization, and when I go to the programs that they do, you know who I see? I see a bunch of young people there. I see a boatload of young people. They're engaging the young people in their community. They're not afraid to have the older generation and the younger generation in the same room having a conversation together. And I think that's a model for all of our communities of color that we can follow. Dr. King said this a long time ago. We can disagree without being disagreeable. It's okay for people to have differences of opinion, to not be on the same page in terms of meeting. But ultimately, when we craft our goals, we craft our messages, we craft, the tools that we're going to use to get to those places, we can collaborate. Listen, this is what I'm going to say, the last thing I'll say. We can have young people go in one particular direction in terms of impacting their peers and how to move forward with electoral politics, and the older generation can continue doing what they did before. Because when we look back at the open housing campaign in Milwaukee, the people who were marching more than anybody else was young people. We don't teach that in school, though. We talk about Father Groppe, we talk about Val Phillips, we forget that thousands of kids, that we had boycotts to the schools in Milwaukee were kids that stepped out. When we look at the Birmingham campaign for Dr. King in 1963, most of the people arrested were children. It wasn't the adults. The parents were afraid. The grandparents were afraid. The young people have a lot of power. When I taught my students the history of the civil rights movement when I was a teacher, I told them, I'm not going to tell you about Rosa Parks and Dr. King. I'm going to tell you about Claudette Colvin, who refused to give up her seat on the bus years before Rosa Parks did, because you have to speak their language. And we don't do that enough. It's okay to be in two separate cars as long as we're going to the same place at the end.
Amen. Dr. Smith, we're just going to have brief last, comments from everybody. We're going to start with Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith, could you?
Yeah, sure. 2 quick points. One, kind of extending off of Reggie's. What we can do that would be very useful is let our young people know that success is in any number of movements is a result of very intentional actions. Whether it's those bus boycotts with those young people, that those folks were doing that intentionally. We often teach this stuff as if it's random. Like one day Rosa Parks got tired. Like, come on, no. That was a part of a long-term orchestrated campaign, and she worked with the NAACP youth councils there and all that. VOCIS here locally has orchestrated the largest public demonstrations our city has seen. And a lot of that has to do with not only Christine's awesomeness as a superhero, but the ways in which certainly the young people are engaged in those movements. Those are lessons to be learned. And we can, one of the things that I often say to young people is, if you think strategically, then you have to hit on multiple heads. If you only think about the one thing you're most concerned about, you get limited. But when you start thinking strategically, you start to see the landscape a little different and realize you have to have multiple places where you're applying pressure. The other thing that I'll say as a wrap up, as much as this moment is about police violence and police murder, as much as this is about folks having to pick a side around humanity and dignity, it's also a moment where white America has to answer for itself. And the question fundamentally that white America has to pose and answer is, do you want this country to be a country of white nationalists or not? It doesn't matter what your party affiliation is. White America has to answer for whether or not this country is going to be a democratic society of diverse folks, or is it going to continue to be controlled by broader systems of white supremacy and ultimately what we see now, white nationalism. And we see some of our white neighbors and friends answering that call.
Amen. Now I want to go to the baddest sister I know in this organizing game. And she's the only sister on the panel. Christine, you want to give your last comments?
Well, that myself and our VOCIS members, our Youth Empowered in the Struggle members, which have really been stepping up during this time. And our commitment is here to continue to build off this. I think this is, while there have been, these are massive protests, I think this is healthy. This is good. We need to keep building off it. And I think here in Wisconsin, here in Milwaukee, and in the smaller communities in Racine, we have been doing good work over the years to be in relationship with each other. I think the point that Reggie was saying, let's do more of it. Yeah. Let's do more of it in this time and build up what we've got. But we've done good, and let's just really build off this energy. And we've got to defeat. We have to prevail in November. I think even the opposition says, if people turn out, and by people they mean youth, they mean Black folks, Latino folks, working class folks, white working class folks. When they turn out, that side wins. And so we have to win in November. And our commitment is every step of the way, 365 days a year. The fight doesn't begin or end on election day. So we're here 365 days of the year. Amen. With you committed.
Amen. See, and this sister can make it happen. Christine, I'm counting on you to make it happen. Okay. Now, I want to go to Russell for a quick close, and then I want you to end it, Mr. Jackson. Is that okay?
Well, thank you, everybody, and I appreciate this conversation today. And I'd like to close with this. In every adversity and every tragedy, there's a seed of the equivalent, and that is an opportunity. So there's an opportunity for us to unify. There's an opportunity for us to explain to the young people if they really, really want change. You have to vote. You need voting and you need protesting. You need community activism and you need legislative policy and change. So I believe that we have to use this opportunity. And I think everybody that's protesting around the nation, around the world, sees this opportunity to make a better United States, to make a better Milwaukee, to make a better world. So as we work together for this mission to be successful as a community, we have to embrace the young people, work together on all races and all colors, but make sure that we are unifying and let the young people know that they can be successful and it's possible to live a successful life, and it's possible to get a job or be an entrepreneur or even become a person that can make the laws. We have to let them know it's possible, and I think this is the time and opportunity now. So thank you very much.
Amen. Amen. Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, I just want to end with this. I think all of us that are on this call today, one of the unique things about all of us is that we work across multiple age groups. We work with young folks, we work with older people, we work with a variety of different people. And I think we are uniquely positioned to be able to take what we hear when we talk to young people and bring it back to the other groups, right? I think the faith community is going to play a big role in getting the word out about the importance of voting. I think, when we think about the work that Christine has done over many, many years and how she's been able to collaborate and bring all of the different, Latino groups together in Milwaukee to do this work, I think it's important that we recognize the power of bringing people together. And most importantly, we can be the point person that connects people together. We can be those network creators because we are in a unique position to have a voice in a variety of different spaces. And as I look at, what we're going to be doing moving forward, making Milwaukee a better place, making Wisconsin a better place, making the United States, the world a better place, I think it's incumbent upon us to take advantage of the voices that we have. And even more important than that, those ears. I was told when I was a kid, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen twice as much as you talk.
Yes.
And I think when we listen and we share those messages we hear with those other groups that we talk to, I think that's a way of bringing us together.
Amen. Now, we thank you all. Boy, this is something else, man. I don't want to go, but I guess we can't be here all day. But this has been awesome for me because this has not been frivolous, meaningless conversation. It's been some potent ideas expressed here today. And I think that it's going to be great if we just stick together. Because I'm going to tell you this, and this is going to be over. Man, they're going to have to pull me up off the ground because I'll be crawling and scratching and begging, and I'll still be fighting on my back or on my stomach until this stuff changes. I'm never going to stop, man. I'm never going to stop. And I see that in each and every one of us who are here right now. And that's the kind of attitude we have to have, because I want to be a man in a world that makes me less than a man. And I want to be able to protect my family and my friends and my relatives. And we have to stick together to do that, Christine. We have to do that, Reggie. We have to do that, Alderman. We have to do that, Dr. Smith. We got to stick together, man, no matter what. Even though we may not agree on everything, we got to find something that we can work on together. Sure. Is that all right, y'all?
Sure. Yep.
Amen. Amen.